Christ be glorified in me. You may be seated. Years ago, I don't know if you saw this movie or not, but there's a movie out that is going back a ways called City Slickers. How many of you have seen that movie? All right, that just gives me how old you are. I know, for real. I'm in that camp. I get it. It's a movie by Billy Crystal was one of the stars in that movie, and it's about a bunch of people that go to this ranch, and they spend a week or two there, and they kind of unstress themselves from life and try to regain some momentum in life and stuff like that. And one of the scenes I think is a significant scene, really has a lot of meaning for even us today, is when Billy Crystal, I forget that his name is actor, but he's there and he's out on a horse with the guy that's kind of the lead there. I think his name is Jack. He's the cowboy, right? And they're out walking or out riding the horse out in the middle of nowhere in this field, and they're having this heart-to-heart kind of conversation. And the cowboy says to Billy Crystal, he says, you know what your problem is? And a bunch of people just like you? And he responded, he says, no, what? He said, you all come about the same time. He said, how old are you? He said, I'm 39. He said, yeah, you come about your midlife crisis kind of time, and you've been working hard to do all kinds of different things, and you get to this point where you're all tied up in knots, and you think that you can spend a couple of weeks here and untie all the knots that you've been working so hard at tying in your life and be able to go back just stress-free. And you'll come back next year and do the same thing all over again. And it kind of resonated with him, and there's a pause, and the cowboy says, the problem is you don't know your one thing. Your one thing. And you can watch the whole clip. It's just a good clip altogether. It has some colorful words that we probably shouldn't have in church, so that's why I'm not showing it this morning. But a lot of us have forgotten our one thing. I would say a lot of us are all tied up in knots, right? Where if life was like this rope, we feel like right now, man, life is just not going the way I want it to go, and things aren't going so well, and I'm working so hard at it, and what happens is things don't go well in this relationship, and I got this knot in my stomach, and this financial pressure that's going on is just really kind of wreaking havoc in my life, and I've got this knot going on in my life, and you get the point, right? And we could go around and we can compare the knots, couldn't we? You know, you've got this one, I've got that one, and mine's worse than yours. And yours is worse than mine. And you have it so bad because, and we've got these knots in our life, and we've just got them kind of working themselves out, and they just affect every area of our life. And I think it's reasonable to say that Christians have lost their one thing, and Christians have a lot of knots in their life just like anybody else. We're not like a special breed where I don't have any knots. We struggle with that. We're tied up in knots, and here's what we do. We try to find that silver bullet, don't we? And maybe the pastor's going to say the right thing today, and he's going to help to untie that knot, and maybe it's helpful. I don't know. Or maybe you get to watch a video, and that video just hits it just right, and you're able to untie a knot. Or maybe you read a book that really helps you to figure out how to untie that knot, and you look for different ways to untie the knots, and it seems like this, and maybe you're like me, that just by the time you untie one, you have three more that built. Anybody with me? You know, it's like, I just worked on one. It took so much to get rid of this one, and now I've got three more to deal with, you know. And I think if we were to walk around the room and have your story be shared, you could tell me and tell us about the knot that you feel today. I think the disciples in Luke's gospel had a knot that we can identify with as well. In Luke chapter 8, I'll just read through this quickly. It's not our main text, it's just one of the texts, and I'm going to be hitting several texts in the Bible But in Luke chapter 8, verse 22, Jesus is with his disciples, and Jesus says to them, he says, one day he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, let's go across to the other side of the lake. And so he identifies the direction that they're going. It's great to get out into the boat and have a good time there. And so they get into the boat and they're going across. And it says, so they set out. And as they sailed, he fell asleep. Jesus is asleep in the boat, so he doesn't get seasick. I don't know if he doesn't need Dramamine or whatever. And as he's sleeping in the boat, a windstorm came down on the lake, as it often does, and they were filling with water and were in danger. These guys that were in the boat, many of them are seasoned fishermen. They know what it's like to get into the boat. They understand the storm. They know the risks. They know how to get out of the storm. And while they're there in this storm, it's coming up. The water is filling the boat. How many of you know that the water is not supposed to be filling the boat, right? Bad day. And they understand they can't unload the water fast enough, and their boat is going down. And so they're in terrible danger. And here's what they do. Verse 24, and they went and woke him. They go to Jesus. They wake him up. Notice where Jesus is. For some reason, the water had not touched him, or it's not bothering him. He is sound asleep. It's been a long, hard day. He needed some rest, and he was getting the rest that he needed to have right there. They go and they wake him up while they're terrified. Listen, think about this. Why in the world, if you think you're going to die, why would you wake somebody else up from their sleep to tell them, hey, you're about to die? Think about the ridiculousness of the statement, right? Because here's what they say. They wake him up and they said, Master, Master, we are perishing. We're about to die. They have calculated it right. They've got a knot in their stomach that's huge. It's like 1,000 knots all in that moment that they say, this is it. This is over. It's done. I don't know how to go any further here. Have you ever been there? In town here, we have some interesting things. I live in Magnolia, and so I'm on Magnolia's Facebook page, and you get to hear the banter of the town. And this week, the banter was pizza places. There's a new pizza place in town. And so my wife and I, a family, we tried out their pizza place on Friday, and the pizza was good. But while we were waiting for the pizza, we ordered our pizza, and they were super busy. Our first week in business, and we're waiting for the pizza. And while we're waiting, we pulled up the Facebook page, pulled up Facebook, and there on Magnolia's thing was someone who had just gotten one of the pizzas an hour previous. And the pizza wasn't that good in their perspective, so they posted this poor evaluation of the pizza. They gave it, I think, a 3.4. Well, this is like an hour. There was 70-some comments underneath that thread in that short period of time. Now, the pizza wasn't bad, don't get me wrong. And there's arguments as to whether it was good pizza or not a good pizza. And then this one said, well, you should go to this pizza place. This one's better. And this one said, and they had all this banter going on here. Yesterday, I'm not always on Facebook, but yesterday I pulled up the Facebook, and I'll just go on there and see what's going on. And another post in Magnolia popped up. And this lady said, I thought Magnolia was a friendly town. My daughter is just about to move there, and I thought it was friendly. That's all she posted. Underneath there was a whole bunch of people, and one of the people said, we're friendly except for when it comes to pizza. Ha ha. And I sat there and I thought on Friday night as I read this, if I was that pizza owner, while I'm frantically making pizzas for people, and I read 79, 85, whatever comments, and I had one bad pizza, out of all the pizzas, and they were swamped, wouldn't that put a knot in your life? Wouldn't you feel like you'd go to the master and you say, I'm about to die here. Do you see all the comments on Facebook? Do you see what they're saying about me? Do you see what's going on in my life? It's going to go bad. My business is going to fail. Things aren't going to work out so good. And you've got knot after knot after knot, and it's just piling up. And you were excited for Friday night up until 5:30 or 6:30 or whatever it was. You can relate, right? And here's what happens. Jesus responds. It says, he woke, he rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and they were calm. Now, if the story stopped there, that'd be cool. But then he turns to the disciples and he says to them, where is your faith? Where is your faith? Disciples, you got all these knots going on in you, and you're like, okay, you got to resolve this, and I'm about to die. And Jesus responds and says, where is your faith? And listen, I'm not, I can't stand here and point the finger and say, where is your faith? You shouldn't have knots in your life. I think we're all fellow strugglers here, aren't we? Where there are times where this knot was not what I asked for, and it's there. I didn't ask for this storm, and I feel like I'm going to die. Or I feel like inside things aren't, how's this going to work out? How's this going to go well? This is bad for my reputation, my life, my everything. And Jesus says, where is your faith? Only Jesus could say that well. Where is your faith? My question then is, how do you get your faith back? It's not that you stopped believing in Jesus. It's that your faith is waning, you're struggling, the knot becomes more valuable, more important. It becomes everything that you can see. You can't get beyond it. It's just a struggle altogether. How do you work through this? How do you build up your faith so you can handle the storm without cynicism, without being overcome with worry, fear, anxiety, or depression? How do you do it is the question. And I would say it comes back to one thing. One thing, which is healthy habit number 6. Healthy habit number 6. David, in the Old Testament, David demonstrated this. He demonstrated both sides of the coin here, and I want to look at that briefly. And there's a lot of examples of this through the Bible, but David gives it very easily for us. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, this is a story we all know, where David is this young man, and this is 1 Samuel chapter 17. You're welcome to turn there, and then we're going to get to chapter 20 in 1 Samuel. It's on page 240 in my Bible. I'm not sure what it is on yours. But David here is just this young man. He's tending to his sheep, and he goes with his brother's sandwiches from his dad to where his brothers are, and they're in battle. And they're in the military, and he's just going to provide for them some food. And while he's there, he hears about this giant named who? Goliath. And Goliath is there. He's just kind of bantering against and provoking Israel. And he's basically saying, hey, listen, you're mine, and you send somebody up here to fight, and if they lose, then we take over your place. And if I lose, then you can take over ours. And all of this craziness going on. You know the backstory for that. And David walks in and he says, hey, listen, what's the big deal with Goliath? He's nothing. I'll take care of him. Could you imagine this little 17-year-old puny nothing, hardly has enough muscles to get anywhere. He says, I'll take care of him. Well, for some reason, King Saul and the rest say, okay, go ahead, have at it. Let's see what happens here. His ability to walk forward in the storm that they were all in is significant. Do you see it? David walks into the storm that everyone else is in. He doesn't wince. He doesn't say, man, I got to go tell Dad. I'm going to take some pictures of it, post it on Facebook. This is a really terrible scene. I'm going to report it like news. He doesn't do that. He doesn't wince. He doesn't back up. He's just filled with all kinds of courage and says, hey, listen, older brothers, King Saul, got it. Have you ever been there? Where this huge giant that should cause a knot in your life does not cause a knot at all. And you go at it with courage. A couple chapters later, it's interesting, you see David on the other side of the coin. Chapter 20, 1 Samuel chapter 20. See, after David defeats Goliath, I don't have to tell you the rest of the story. You know how it goes. He takes a slingshot and he goes and throws a stone and kills Goliath, cuts off his head, and he has this great, amazing victory that happens. But in the process of that victory, King Saul becomes jealous of him and wants him dead. And this is the next part of the story. Chapter 21, you find David in verse 10. He's running for his life from King Saul. He's just literally trying to protect the king from killing him and protect himself from getting killed. In verse 10 it says, David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. The servants of Achish said to him, to the king, "Is not this David the king of the land?" Which is interesting. He's not the king yet, but everybody knows who's in charge. Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. What do you do in that moment when you find yourself in a foreign city and you're being chased by the people that should be appreciating you, and now you're in a foreign city and they discover that you're there, and now your life is at stake? Verse 12, and David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. David goes from absolute fearlessness, walking into this battle with Goliath, to living in total fear, knots in his stomach with King Achish. You see the difference? Have you ever been there? We're on one side, you're like, I got this! And on the other side, like, I don't know how it's going to work out. What am I going to do? Right? You have knots in your stomach that's just welling up, and it's just really working itself overtime on you. Here's the difference. The similarity is he's got people that want him dead, both sides. The circumstance really hasn't changed much, just different people. The difference is one thing. It's one thing. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, in verse 37, we see David's perspective on the situation, and he says it back, and just for sake of time, I'm just going to read it quickly and just highlight this one aspect because he says it several times in different ways. His perspective in verse 37 is, David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Here's his one thing. He wasn't banking on his abilities. He wasn't banking on anything other than God's got this. God delivered me here, he'll deliver me here too. In chapter 21, with King Achish, he was terrified of the king. End of story. The distinction between the two is his perspective on God. Wouldn't he be able to say the same thing when he's in Gath? Wouldn't he be able to say the same thing? The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, paw of the bear, and from Goliath, this Philistine who's from Gath. Wouldn't God also deliver me in this moment as well? Shouldn't that be the statement? And listen, all of us would love for consistency in this area, that we never give up, and we're constantly courageous, and we don't get knots that kind of bind up in our life. But we find ourselves like David. The one thing that affects everything is worship. The one thing that affects everything is worship. The distinction between David with Goliath and David with Gath, the distinction between the two was his worship, his perspective of God in that moment. The Lord will deliver me. Oh no, this king's so big, I'm afraid. It was his perspective, it was his worship. And here's the reality. Everyone here is a worshiper of someone or something. Everyone here is a worshiper of someone or something. Do you realize that? We all worship something. We all worship someone. Worship is this, just to give you a quick definition. Worship is placing value or worth on something or someone. It's placing value on something. And who or what we worship identifies then our value system. Worship is not limited to a specific place at a specific time. Just because we gather to worship doesn't mean our worship ends when we leave here. Our value system. Worship is all about a value system. I'm going to illustrate that for you so that you can hopefully grab onto this a little bit better. So, our value system goes from things that we have no value. You look and say, there's no value in this, right? I perceive that this thing in my life or this thing around me, this has no value. And then you have something else, and it's kind of a spectrum thing where it kind of climbs a little bit. Here's the next one. This thing I find in this box, these are the things I find to have value. Now, on top of that then, so you have no value, then these things have value. Then on top of that is these are the things that I worship. Now, there's a distinction between all three of these things. Yesterday, I was tempted to go out and buy a lottery ticket, or 2 days ago, because in that lottery ticket, I could win $1 billion. Could you imagine $1 billion? Well, whatever. The chances were highly unlikely, and so I didn't. But if I would have won, how many of you went on that little rabbit trail in your mind? Boy, if I had $1 billion, I mean, I would only take 10. Listen, I would definitely tithe, right? I would give to. Don't you worry. I would if I $1 billion to church. Anyway. But have you ever dreamed, what would I get? See, that's the thing that you find to be valuable, right? So for me, if I were to daydream, people have asked me this, and we were at a men's meeting last month, and one of the guys said, hey, of all these cars, and they have a display full of cars, of old classic cars, which one would you like to have? Well, I brought a truck, because if I could pick out one, but to be honest with you, I'd like a collection of cars. That's why $1 billion would be necessary, right? But anyway, I would probably get somewhere around a 1946 Ford pickup truck. I just think they're cool looking. Anybody with me? Yeah, all right. Now, time out for a second. How many of you would take a 1946 Ford pickup truck and put it in the valuable box? Okay, half of you. How many of you would say there's no value in a 1946 Ford pickup truck because it doesn't have airbags, it doesn't have air conditioning, it doesn't have this and that and the other thing? How many of you put it in the not valuable box? You should be ashamed of yourself, people. But you see the distinction? What I find to be valuable, you can look at and say, it's not valuable to me. And that's perfectly fine. We can agree to disagree on certain things like that, okay? So I'm going to put it in the valuable box, okay? And I'm going to take all kinds of different things in my life, and I'm going to put into my valuable box, and you're going to put things into valuable, not valuable, and we're going to put things into a worship box. Let me talk this through just a little bit. If I had a 1946 Ford pickup, I would put it in my valuable box, and here's the reality. Some people say it has no value. For me, I consider it to be valuable, and I would enjoy owning it. The distinction between this and this, see, these are easy because you can see what I value and don't value. The distinction between valuable and worship is something I ascribe so much value to that it controls my life then. It changes my perspective. It means that I value it above other valuable things. I prioritize my money, I prioritize my time, I prioritize my energy, and if something else happens to it, my life seems like it is not valuable. Do you see that? That's worship. Worship is I devote so much time and energy and everything into this, and if something happens, like one guy I heard of that fixed up his Chevelle, got it all fixed up, was just amazed with, did a frame off restoration, and decided, you know what, I'm going to just take it for a quick spin. Took it out of his garage, took it down the street for a quick spin, hit the gas a little bit too hard, spun it around, and totaled it. First drive. Sadly, he had never insured it. So he lost everything. He was depressed. Because for years he had put every ounce of his time and energy and effort into fixing the Chevelle up and couldn't wait to drive it, so much so that he didn't insure, and he just pushed too much into it. It was a worship item. And everybody knew it. He knew it. And his life fell apart when he lost that thing. That's just one thing. What about people? Family. Where do we put family? You know, that's really challenging, isn't it? For some of you, you've been hurt by family and you say, they're not valuable. Some of you say, family has utmost value to me, and I want family around for everything. But then sometimes, family becomes a worship item, doesn't it? Where here's the distinction. My distinction is no value. That's simple, right? I don't value. I'm not going to hang out with you. We're done. Value is I value and I want you to be part of my life. If you give me advice, I want to hear what you have to say. If you're there and you see what I'm doing, I want to hear things that you have to say because you are valuable to me, what you have to say. But I might disagree with you, and we might have some challenges here, and we'll see where that goes. Relationships going a little bit further outside of family and just kind of broaden this in relationships and people. Acceptance. When I want for acceptance so badly that it becomes something I worship, what happens is I change from just you're valuable and I want you in my life to I will do whatever it takes to keep you in my life. That's worshiping acceptance or respect. It's that I'll do whatever. I will mold myself around you in order to get you to appreciate, to respect, or to love me, or to want to be around me. Because sometimes what happens is you are the one that gets put into the non-valuable box, and that's tying knots up into your life, and you don't know what to do with it. And what happens on the flip side of that is your response or reaction is you've been worshiping them for so long, and you'll do whatever it takes to get their attention. I see this in dating relationships a lot. At my age now, I'm starting to see it with parents and kids too. Where we'll kind of do whatever we can to keep that relationship alive. That seems to be much more like worship. That I will cater to my whole life, steer it around you in this kind of a way, to get acceptance and respect. And that's really what we're worshiping. It's not so much the child or the parent or the friend or the individual or the neighbor. It's that we want respect so bad. We want acceptance so bad. We want that relationship so bad that we're worshiping that, and that's what's in this box then. So we have all kinds of things, don't we? That's just to name a few. I wrote down several others. You know, you can... What do you think of this? This is a piece of art, something you create. Where does this go? Some would say, I don't value this. Some would say it's valuable. And some would say, I worship this. I have to have this. And all of your keys that have links to this, that, and the other thing. And then what do you do with this one? Where's Milestone Church go? Some people say it's not valuable because it's not touching my life the way I'd like it to touch my life. And then other people would say, oh, it's so valuable. I need to have this Milestone family in my life. And others would say, you know what, I can't live without, and it becomes a worship thing. Do you realize that worshiping God is the only thing that should go in this box? That's the one thing. That's the difference with David, with Goliath, and Gath. It's that his worship of God was so present that while knots were potentially building up in his life and things weren't going so well, his worship of God is what got him through to the other side. Now, follow me just for a moment, because I think that most of us assume that we are worshiping God. And I would like to challenge that. Because we think, we assume that we are a worshiper of God. Let's go back to these categories. A person that finds no value in God, and let's just use God's word, the Bible, as a picture of God. Okay? A person that says, I don't value God, says, listen, I believe in your existence, and you're fine to be where you're at, but you're not important enough for me to be around you. So when I'm invited into your presence, that's not valuable enough for me. I know a lot of Christians that actually would put God in the no value box. Do you realize that? And I think if we're going to be honest, there's times and seasons where we put God into the no value box, that, you know what God's opinion is and what God thinks about that and what God's advice would be, I just don't really value it that much because my opinion matters more. And that's where we get to the valuable part. Some say, no, God is valuable, and here's what we do. We listen to God's opinion in life. We listen to God's thoughts about things. But when God's thoughts, when God's opinion disagrees with ours, we dismiss God. It's valuable only to the degree that we agree with God, and we say to God, we can agree to disagree on this one. There's a lot of things we can pick on for that, isn't there? Morality is one huge one today that I would look at and say, what does God actually say about this, that, and the other thing? Because in our culture, young and old, we've become more accepting of just sleeping around. We've become more accepting of all kinds of things that God would say, no, that's not right. We value God up until the point where we disagree with God, and so he's in my life, but we can agree to disagree. That's not worship. The distinction between this and worship is, worship says, God, if you say it, I will do everything I can by your grace, mercy, and through the courage you give to me to follow through with it. That's worship. It's distinctly different. It's, if I disagree, I'm going to figure this out and navigate myself to be where you want me to be. That's worship. It's that I value you, God, above my brain, above my thinking, above the cultural demands that are outside here. I value you above all of those things. That's true worship. It's not just that I came, I attended church, and it was good enough, or it's not just that I believed at one point, I went to Sunday school, and isn't that good enough? No, true worship is over here. It's that, God, you have every part of my life. I'm willing to follow you no matter where you lead me. That's worship. And when my opinion disagrees with God's opinion, when I want to tell them off because they ticked me off so bad, they got in my way, they said the wrong things, and when I want to just let them have it, everything in me is just aching to let them have it. True worship says, yes, I would like to let him have it, but because I am a child of God, I understand that he says, and be ye what? Kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. How? As Christ has for us, right? That's a true worshiper. True worshiper says, oh yeah, but listen, we're going to be together forever, so why not just indulge in this before marriage? A true worshiper says, no, time out. Yes, while the desire is there, God says, no, you should wait. And so what we do is we say, okay, desire is there, but God says, wait, so I'm going to worship God and put him first in this area as well and follow through with that. It plays out in every area of our life, doesn't it? Worship plays out in how we handle our finances and what we do with what we... Can a worshiper have a beautiful 1946 Ford pickup that's totally restored top to bottom and has a really awesome engine with a blower on it that can go and run 12s down at Maple Grove Raceway or whatever I'd go? Can a worshiper of God own a truck like that that's worth $60,000? Yes or no? Can a worshiper of God own a mansion that costs $5 million? Yes or no? Can a worshiper of God buy a brand new Lexus every year? Yeah. As long as those things are not the things that they worship. If God's provided for you to have a life where you have those things, who cares? You can enjoy that. But when that becomes your object of worship rather than God, you value that above your relationship with God, then you have a problem. Romans 8:28, let me finish out with two things. Romans 8:28. Paul says, and here, to me, Romans chapter 8 is this huge chapter on worship. Romans chapter 8:28, the Apostle Paul says this. He says, and my mind just blanked, all things work together for good. All things work together for good to them that love God. As I'm worshiping God, everything will work out for good. Does that mean that we will not have a tragedy in our family? Does that mean that I'll never have a temptation and put a knot in my life? Does that mean I'll never struggle with anything? Does that mean that I'll always have money to pay all my bills? Does that mean that I'll be able to have everything the way I want, my respect? No, that's not what it means. It means all things work together for good to those that love him, that God knows exactly what's going on in our life, and he's not messing things up. Fast forward into the next few verses, and he talks about how God loves us with an everlasting love, and there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. Is that God continues to work in ways that we just look and we say, wow, this is why I worship him, because look at how he works. As I'm following, as I'm loving God, he just keeps on working and keeps on working. And the thing I thought while I'm in the boat and the storm comes up and I'm like, don't you care that I'm about to die? He's like, no, I got this. I told you we're going to the other side. Where's your faith? And we respond and say, oh, yeah, I did kind of mess up there. And they marvel at this man that they're standing next to in the boat that can calm the waves in the sea just like that. That's worship. What turned into fear now turns into worship. Instantly the knot goes away, doesn't it? Job. If you're not familiar with the Bible, you'd read through the Bible and you get to this one book and it sounds like job. Oh, there's a job here. For some reason, I'm not sure why, but we call him Job. I'm not sure if it's whatever. But Job is this guy in the Old Testament, right before Psalms, talks about his life where he goes and he is worshiping God. This is chapter 1. He's worshiping God by praying for his children and such. And he is a person that loves God so much. He is a true worshiper of God, that everything in his life belongs to God. And he is a rich man, one of the richest people around. God had blessed him significantly. While he was worshiping God, storms came up, and just to cut the long story short, storms came up and he lost everything. He lost his children, he lost all of his farms, he lost all of his produce, he lost everything. A true worshiper of God realizes that I value these things. I value this relationship. I value my children. I value my stuff. I value this. It's okay to value it. It's that I enjoy it because God's blessed me with this. But Job was a true worshiper that at the end of losing everything, here's what he said. Naked came I into this world, and naked will I return. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Boy, is that hard. Because let's be honest. When you lose someone so close to you, you just get knots, right? And when you lose your bank account that you've worked all your life at, you feel like it's going to be another knot. And you've got all this going on, and you've got this guy Job that worshiped God so well and understood God so well that he was able to turn and say, Lord, all these things that I value, I don't worship. You gave them to me. And you can take them away. But I'll keep worshiping you. So, church, if you're tied up in knots, likely it's because you've put a whole lot of things into this box that don't belong here. All your creation, your family. You know, I've got this nameplate that says Pastor William Dilworth. This is my identity. Worship, trucks, my schedule, my life, vehicles I drive. Likely, if you're tied up in knots, it's because you have too many things in this box. And there's only one thing. There's only one that belongs in this box. It's God. So, it's a two-part message. This week is part 1. And here's your assignment this week. To evaluate. Evaluate. It's kind of like that commercial. What's in your wallet? Right? I mean, I kind of wanted, I was thinking if we had 3 wallets up here, that'd be really cool. I could use that commercial. Okay, so every time you're watching TV and that comes up, I want you to stop and think, what's in your wallet? No. What's in your box is the question. What is it that you are putting in the not valuable that maybe God wants you to put into the valuable? What are you putting into the valuable that should be in the not valuable? And what are you putting into the worship that belongs in one of these two boxes? Just evaluate. This week's evaluation. I would suggest that most anxiety and depression, maybe most is too big of a word, I'm not sure. Some of our anxiety and depression is caused by things in the wrong box. Is that crazy? Think about that. And this week as you evaluate, and you've got a knot that comes up, and it really works at you, just pause. Okay, God, this knot's really driving me crazy here. Just have a conversation with God, just like I'm talking right now. Lord, what box is this really in? And Lord, why is it in this box? And next week we'll talk about how to reorganize your boxes. Because sometimes I think that's what we need to do. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for examples like David, Job, Paul, Elijah, and the list goes on and on and on of people that on one hand they had the courage to worship you and to walk courageously into situations and not have knots. And yet just a little while later, they go into situations where they got to figure out how to untie the knots. Lord, help us to see it in our own lives. Help us to see the things that we're putting in the wrong boxes. So that, Lord, at the end of this, we'll learn to worship you and bring glory to you. Because, God, you're worth it. And we will give you the praise for all that you do in our lives. Through Jesus I pray. Amen.